Good morning. My name is Sarah Crookall. I'm a partner in the commercial law. And thank you for joining us today in the second in our four-part seminars on AI. Over the series of seminars, we've been exploring the evolving role of AI in professional services, its opportunities, risks, and the realities. Our seminar in September explored AI and the future of intellectual property. Today's seminar, presented by my colleagues in the employment team, will explore the impact of AI in the workplace. We will look at what AI is and how it's being used in the workplace. We will discuss employment law and how these govern the use of AI in the workplace. We'll also consider the current issues and risks regarding the use of AI in the workplace. The rise of AI has been rapid and for some unsettling. The aim of today is to equip you with insights to help navigate the evolving legal landscape of AI at work.
Well, as Sarah said, this is the second, did you say second, Sarah? Yeah, the second in our AI seminar series, and the focus today is very much on AI in the workplace. And it was interesting talking to some of you before we started the presentation and hearing about people's anxieties, how AI is being used, how it's being developed. And hopefully we'll answer a lot of the questions that you might have when we present to you this morning. So I'm joined this morning by my colleague Victoria Furlong, Gary Hunter and Claire Wagstaff. And as Sarah explained, we're going to go through the journey of AI as it currently is. So looking at types of AI, looking at the risks, looking at how it's being used, and giving you some practical tips and suggestions that you can take away with you to help you reduce risks within your organisation. So, I think what I've seen as an employment solicitor for a number of years is a lot of employers are embracing AI. They're seeing the benefits that it can bring, primarily around cost cutting, increasing productivity, also seeing it as a way to help their employees make their jobs easier for them. But all of that does also come with risks. So the key thing in relation to an employment relationship is that it's a personal relationship between an individual employee and their employer. And so employees are worried about AI being used to take away that personal relationship, decisions being made by machines, not understanding how those decisions are being made, not trusting the decisions that are made. So there is a lot of concern. Oh, I forgot to do my slides. A lot of concern about it, but it's expanding hugely, and as I say, being embraced hugely. So we need to sort of keep a pace and think about how we can use those benefits. So I think the key areas currently where we're seeing it being used in the world of employment is recruitment. So there's a lot of AI around recruitment. There's also a lot of AI that's being used around task allocation. Some employers, bigger employers, have got huge pieces of AI machinery that works out who's going to do what and how long it's going to take them and when they're going to do it. And we've also got a lot of AI being used for monitoring and performance management. Employees don't like being monitored particularly, so that particularly I think has come out of lockdown and COVID and remote working. So they're the sort of typical areas where we're seeing it being used. But I wanted to share on the slide some of the press articles that have recently been released that demonstrate how some of the larger employers are using it. So Shopify's CEO putting out there a clear message that he doesn't want people in his organisation to employ a human until they've decided that it's not a role that can be performed by AI. A bit worrying for their employees. Sky have also announced recently that they've cut 2,000 jobs in their call centre. AI is an obvious piece of machinery that can be used to answer phones. I'm sure you've had the irritation of knowing that you're speaking to a chatbot, not a human being. And that's causing anxiety amongst employees because they're really worried about losing their jobs as a result of this. Then Starbucks, more of a personal relationship when you go and buy your coffee, a nice person that recognises you, says hello. They've stopped and sort of pulled back some of their use of AI because they're seeing it's having a negative impact on relationships. So their sales slumped as a result. And then two sort of hot off the press announcements that I or one of my colleagues found for me, maybe using AI online, was JP Morgan. They've recently announced that they're going to be using AI as part of their performance management within their organisation. So they've designed an AI tool that will prompt their employees to answer questions to get the most out of their performance review sessions. So they're introducing that. And KPMG are obviously focusing a lot on AI and the benefits that they see AI bringing to their organisation. So they've announced that from next year, they're going to be actually assessing their employees on how well they've met the company's AI objectives. So they don't want people to be pushing against the tide. They want people to be embracing the change, and they'll be measuring them in relation to that at their appraisal stages. So what does that mean in reality? Well, the government commissioned a big YouGov poll recently, and I think the results of that have been quite mixed. As you would expect, employers seem more positive, employees seem far more anxious. So the stats on the slide, 71% of adults are concerned about AI being used in performance management and bonus decisions. I think that shows there's a real anxiety around how reliable it is, whether it can be trusted. And then 77% of adults opposing it being used for making hiring decisions, 86 oppose it being used for making firing decisions. Again, that shows people lack trust at the moment in those decisions and I'm sure understanding around how those decisions would be made. 35% of employers think that AI will increase productivity. So I think the employers see the benefits, increase productivity, reduce cost. As you would expect, the workers are more worried about losing their jobs. But I think if employers explain the benefits and how they see AI working to improve the ability of an employee to do their job well, then they can bring their employees along on that journey. And that's what they last at, 69% of workers in the UK thinking that employees should be consulted before these sorts of technologies are introduced. And I think that will be a theme that you'll see throughout the presentations, bringing employees on the journey, explaining things to them, making sure they understand it, really helps them to embrace it and trust what you're planning to do. So just a little warm up there. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Gary, who's going to talk to you about what AI is and how it's being used in the workplace.
What is AI? To me, it seemed like quite an obvious answer. I consider myself quite tech savvy, and I use AI on a day-to-day basis. After musing for about 30 minutes, here's the answer I came up with. My master's in law being put to work there. So I did what any young professional would do in my position. I asked ChatGPT, and this was its answer. A little bit more detailed than mine, but I don't actually think it's that much more helpful than mine. My first reaction to seeing that was, I'm not reading all of that. Thankfully, ChatGPT can do quite a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So I asked it to summarize it, and it did that. It said that AI, or artificial intelligence, is when computers are designed to think and learn like humans. It powers things like voice assistants, chatbots, face recognition, and recommended systems. When you use AI, you should double check it, and that is what I did. So this is what the experts actually said. To summarize, AI is technology that enables computers and machines to simulate human learning, comprehension, problem solving, decision making, creativity. But the experts actually expanded a little bit more on the differential between what they call weak AI or narrow AI and strong AI. We're not going to be discussing strong AI today because, in truth, it doesn't exist yet. That is when AI software is on the same level as a human being or surpasses it. And in the International Business Magazine, the authors had a very, very lovely quote, which said, despite recent advances in AI development, self-aware AI systems of science fiction remain firmly in that realm. So unless Darth Vader's writing emails for you, we aren't going to be discussing that. No, we're going to be discussing what narrow AI is. That is what we actually use on a day-to-day basis. Here's just some examples of the ways in which narrow AI is used on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to focus on two. For those of you who have Teams meetings on Teams, Microsoft Teams, you can record the meeting via transcript. In practice, that's where we find the biggest misuse of AI. At least that's where I found it. My colleague Victoria is going to expand on that later on in the presentation. You can then go even further and have a system called Otter AI, which not only transcribes the meeting for you, but it produces meeting notes. And I think, if anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, it produces a plan of action as well, which you can imagine how helpful that is. And then you have what I think most people do use AI for, which is drafting emails and drafting documents. You could imagine how dangerous that could be in practice, whether you're putting in tons of confidential information into these AI systems, or if your employee just simply doesn't know how to write a simple email. I'm going to test you guys all, and on your tables you've seen flipped down, pieces of paper. One of these emails was written by AI, and one of them was written by me. One by me, one by AI. I put some on the table for you guys as well. I'll give you guys a minute, and I want to see if you guys can find out which one was which. And feel free to discuss in your tables. Okay, that's the minute over. I'm going to go around each table and I'm not a teacher, so I feel like I don't know how to get a room's attention. I'm going to go around each table, and I would love to know which one you think is the right one, and if you could explain why, that would be amazing. I'll start here. This one was completely written by AI. All I said was, can you write an email getting correspondence in? That's it. I didn't ask for anything else. It was a little bit of a red herring. I did put the M dashes in because I thought it would catch people out. I do use M dashes on a day-to-day basis, so that's my excuse. But what I think that shows is it's quite hard to actually tell when an email is AI generated and when an email is not AI generated. And I do, to a degree, worry in 10 years' time whether employees will be able to write a simple email. If you can get that now, I can imagine what you could get in 10 years' time. And finally, how AI is used in the recruiting business, or to recruit members of staff. I personally have never been on the other end of this, so it's not something that I'm used to. But I feel like I would potentially feel a little bit cheated if I went through the recruitment process, did the video interview, and an AI system said that my skills weren't great. Equally, automated candidate screening, AI-powered background screening, best AI-driven candidate referrals. The way AI is used in these contexts has real-world implications to how candidates feel, and we can't get away from how important that human connection is when trying to place the best candidate. But we'll expand on that more within this presentation. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening.
So the sort of headline thing to say is that currently there is no employment law specifically designed to deal with risks around AI. So nothing yet in place. I'm sure it will come at some point. So what we do have, though, is various other bits of employment law legislation currently within the UK that touches on areas of risk around AI and the use of AI. I would say that the EU are ahead of us. They're ahead of the game here because they have already looked at AI and they have already introduced specific legislation to control and reduce the risks as they see them. So I'm going to go through the areas where we do have laws that will have an impact on AI use in this slot. The first area then is common law. So every employment relationship is governed by a contract. And the employment relationship, as I said earlier, is a personal relationship. So it's a human relationship between an employer and an employee. And at the centre of that relationship is an implied term of trust and confidence. So every employment contract has the implied term of trust and confidence within it. And that is a necessary term for the relationship to survive. And if there's a breakdown in trust and confidence, then the employer runs the risk that an employee will go off and bring a constructive dismissal claim. So you can see that that could be a risk when AI is being used by employers, because if employers aren't explaining the decisions that they're making, if the way that they're using AI isn't transparent and clear to employees, and the outputs and the decisions that are being made are not understood by employees, there's a high risk that that relationship of trust and confidence will break down, and then employees will go off and bring constructive dismissal claims. So employers really do need to make sure they're consulting, engaging, explaining, and being transparent about their use of AI and how they're making those decisions if they want to avoid the risk of constructive dismissal claims. The next piece of legislation that we already have is the Equality Act. So employers have to ensure that AI tools that they're using don't disadvantage protected groups, otherwise they risk discrimination claims. And that would apply whether they're deliberately, intentionally doing that or unintentionally. And when AI is being used, there is a real risk of unintentional discrimination playing into decisions that they might be making. So they need to make sure that the AI tools are not biased. And as I think Gary mentioned earlier, you know, AI tools are designed based on the data that's input into them. And so we've had, you know, you can imagine examples like a clever employer decides that they're going to manage their new shift system by looking at people's productivity and availability over the last 3 months and allocate shifts on the basis of those outcomes. Well, if one of the employees had a disability and their productivity was not as good and they weren't as available because they have had to have time off because they've been sick, then the resulting shift patterns that are generated by that AI system will be biased and tainted with discrimination and indirectly discriminating against somebody with a protected characteristic. So the key thing here is the data needs to be accurate, the data needs to be reviewed by a human, and managers need to have ultimate oversight and check the things that come out, because there is a high risk otherwise that there will be biases within there and that claims could result from that. So making sure that the decisions are transparent and clear is key. Also, actually, before I move on to that slide, the other requirement for an employer, if they have got an employee with a disability, is to make reasonable adjustments. And so if you do have a system that you've designed and applied, and it does have a disproportionate impact on somebody with a disability, then you do need to consider whether it's reasonable to make adjustments to the way that it's operating for others. So the example that Gary gave about recruitment, it's much more common for video interviewing to now be used by employers. Lots of the big employers, when they're doing their graduate intake, it's all initial video interview, not with a human. If somebody had a speech impediment, for example, they may not come across as well at video interview stage. So employers need to think about those things and make adjustments to make sure that people aren't being disadvantaged if they're using those sorts of systems. Then unfair dismissal, another area of employment law that everybody will be familiar with. So the Employment Rights Act says that if you're going to dismiss an employee, it will be unfair unless you've got a potentially fair reason for dismissing the employee. But also the employer needs to show that they've acted reasonably in treating that reason as a sufficient reason for dismissal. So again, you can see AI creeping in here if employers are making decisions about terminating an employee's employment, and that's based on AI and productivity results that have come through AI. They're monitoring an employee, and there's information that's come out of that monitoring, and they just rely on that information to decide to dismiss somebody. So an employer who's relying on AI when dismissals are taking place really needs to make sure they understand the data that they've relied on when they've made that decision, that the algorithms are working in the way that they're designed to work, and that they're interpreting the data properly and they're making the correct decisions based on the decisions that come out of that algorithm. Otherwise, they risk the unfair dismissal scenario. Oversight of the human is key here, because if an employer ends up in an employment tribunal, they will need to be able to justify the decision that they've reached, and if they don't understand the technology, it's going to be very difficult to justify that, and there's a much greater risk of claims as a result. Then the other area of law that has an impact on AI in the workplace is data protection. So we're still governed by the EU GDPR rules, and we've got our own Data Protection Act as well. AI, as we've said, uses a huge amount of data. A lot of that's personal data that's being processed by an employer as a controller. An employee can say that they don't want decisions that are based solely on automated processing to affect them. There are some exceptions, but if you've got no human involvement in the way that you're making those decisions, then you can come into difficulties. Victoria's going to come on and talk about all these more interesting things later, and talk about data protection in more detail. But that will have a significant restriction on how you can process data automatically within AI systems. So you really need to understand data protection rules and make sure you're processing that data lawfully. The ICO have issued some really helpful, useful guidance on this, so it's definitely worth reading that and making sure that you're understanding all of that. And then the other area of law, again, which can impact AI in the workplace, is the Human Rights Act. So we are humans after all, and AI is being used to manage us. People like their privacy. They don't like to be over-managed and over-scrutinised. Article 8 protects the right to privacy. So that's the most likely area where we can see this coming into play in the employment field, particularly because monitoring is becoming far more prevalent. So if you're monitoring employees, that you run the risk that they could argue that their right to privacy under Article 8 is being breached. So an employer can do that, but they need to be able to justify that and make sure that they're doing it in accordance with the law and that they're pursuing that monitoring for a legitimate aim. And often an employee who's monitoring employees will be doing that for a legitimate aim, but you just need to think it through. Think about how you can justify it and explain it. Otherwise, there will be real issues, particularly, some employers use spyware and all sorts of clever technology to monitor their employees. So risks there as well. What's in the pipeline? So as I said earlier, there isn't any current specific AI legislation around employment. I'm sure it won't have escaped any of you's attention that the Employment Rights Bill is the big headline piece of legislation that the government's currently working on. It doesn't mention AI at all, so when that comes into play, we're not expecting any changes. The Trade Union Congress, TUC, has got on board and they've published a detailed strategy document themselves, which sets out their recommendations. This is all about protecting workers, involving them in the development of AI in the workplace. That's something that the government will now be aware of and no doubt will be considering. But all we've been told at the moment is that the government's going to be consulting on the use of AI in the workplace. And they're saying that they'll be doing that in due course. Nothing to suggest when in due course might be. They're very busy at the moment, so it's not going to be this year. It will be at some stage next year. So the position currently in terms of legislation on AI for employers is unclear. I think it's a matter of watching this space. But with the pace of technology change, you know, there is going to be a need to get some legislation in place to provide the protections that are needed and the clarity that's needed for employers as well. So I will hand over now to Victoria, who, as we've already said, is going to be talking to you about lots of practical risks within the workplace.
Thank you, Catherine. As Catherine has said, I'm Victoria, and today I'll be going through some points about recruitment and promotions, discrimination in disciplinary or dismissal procedures, and also GDPR. So employers, as we all know, are increasingly implementing AI into their recruitment and promotions procedures. But there are certain risks that we must be mindful of when doing this. The first is a discrimination risk. So decisions which are accused by employees or job applicants of being discriminatory can prove difficult for employers, particularly if a claim is raised. An employer will need to be able to explain their decision to reject someone for a job or for a promotion. Employees and candidates may ask why they've been unsuccessful in applying for a certain role. And often providing a transparent and sufficient answer can stop a complaint or even a tribunal claim in its tracks. So it will be important to understand the nature of any AI program being used and the information it uses to make decisions, as if not, it can be difficult to demonstrate that discrimination played no part in the decision and to defend this decision if the AI tool was used. This is particularly the case if there is a perceived lack of transparency on the part of the employer when they've failed to explain clearly how the AI tool operates. Because, don't forget, AI is made by humans, it's modelled by human intelligence, and in its current stage, it is vulnerable to biases because of this. AI may make false equivalences depending on the systems used. So they could potentially discount individuals with a certain type of surname, for example, from hiring opportunities. Amazon, a few years ago, was forced to discontinue an AI recruitment tool because it was trained on 10 years worth of successful CVs, successful applications. But the problem was in the tech male-dominated industry, a lot of these CVs were, of course, male. That then meant that the AI tool demonstrated a clear bias in favour of male applicants over its female applicants. There are also questions regarding race, age, and disability discrimination with similar problems to the above, but also with accessibility concerns regarding elderly or disabled applicants who may be disadvantaged, so either through having to use AI in recruitment procedures or even through the expectation of using AI in the workplace. So this issue presents mainly through data supply chain risks. And sometimes employers are limited in knowing whether or not an AI tool could potentially present discriminatory outcomes. Often, the AI system is constructed from a series of components that have been developed outside of the employer organisation and passed down through a chain of different organisations and data sets before they're incorporated into a final system. So the importance is knowing whether discrimination can occur because of one or more of these links in the chain, and this can be a problem if the right questions are not asked in the contracts with AI organisations and if they do not include sufficient provisions. So the key takeaway from the above for employers is to be wary of relying solely on AI to make decisions involving recruitment, and particularly if they're not entirely aware of how the AI tool has been trained. This issue was demonstrated through the case of Manjang and Uber Eats. In this case, Mr. Manjang was a black driver for Uber Eats, and he noticed that the Uber Eats app, which was powered by Microsoft, was increasing the facial verification checks required to allow him to pick up jobs. So in 2021, his account was suspended after continued mismatches, preventing him from earning a living from picking up jobs. When the AI software was investigated, it was determined that the non-white users of this software were placed at a significant disadvantage, with the biggest difference being the white male users of the app having a 99% accuracy rate, in comparison to black women users of the app with a 35% error rate. The case was settled for an undisclosed figure, and Mr. Manjang's representative, Paul Jennings, of the firm Bates Wells, he said, AI has very rapidly become part of workforce management. If it is deployed in a way that lacks transparency and fairness, it will have a highly corrosive effect on trust. It is vital that any automated decision-making process affecting people's livelihoods are not opaque. Businesses using these systems must absolutely prioritise openness and accountability. This therefore highlights the importance of having awareness of these issues if AI tools are being used, and of course of any biases they may have. Now, as more employees implement AI into daily tasks, we are likely to see an increase in disciplinary and capability issues being instigated due to inappropriate or incompetent use of AI. So examples may be using ChatGPT to write a document, not checking it properly, sending it out to a client or customer, and it being substandard or incorrect. Many of you will probably be aware of some cases recently, such as Qatar National Bank and the Haringey Law Centre case, where the lawyers involved in the case cited cases which did not exist in their submissions because they relied on AI to draft these submissions. Another example may be transcribing meetings using Microsoft Teams or Otter, where the programs send the transcription automatically to the invitees of the meeting, even if they did not attend. So, employees have found themselves in situations where they've discussed confidential matters once a participant has dropped out of the call. So you can imagine having a conversation, this person drops out, you continue to have a more confidential aspect of this conversation that the first person shouldn't be privy to, but then the full transcript is sent to all invitees, including that first person. We have recently seen a matter where an employee who was invited but did not attend a meeting was sent the transcript of a meeting where the possibility of his and his colleagues' roles being made redundant were being discussed in that meeting, and the transcript was sent to everyone. AI was a theme throughout the case, with the client asking ChatGPT how to be seen to act reasonable in the 11th hour right before the tribunal hearing, and ChatGPT told it to send an offer in open correspondence. That nugget of advice was shouted down quite quickly by Asa Morbalo, and the opposing side on the same matter used ChatGPT to write their pleadings, which were messy, convoluted, and left us all scratching our heads. The issue with AI in this context is that it's only as good as the information that is provided to it. So we've seen an increase in clients calling us saying they think they've got a slam dunk of a case and they're owed millions of pounds. But the problem is they're telling AI parts of their matter with certain important information, with certain nuances being left out. There's also a risk that employees may insert confidential information into AI when asking for answers for questions or to draft documents. And the ICO has stated that AI systems can exacerbate security risks or create new ones. You are legally required to implement appropriate technical and organisational measures to ensure a level of security appropriate to this risk. So employees who are not adequately briefed on the risks could be inserting confidential information into the AI sphere, allowing it to potentially be included in public databases or causing data protection breaches some other way. Evidently, the use of AI can pose risks to business if it's not used carefully or appropriately. So to avoid mistakes such as those I've just mentioned, assessments should be undertaken in the workplace and policies should be implemented to ensure that staff are aware of the employer's approach to AI and any limits or rules that employees need to use when they're using AI. And Claire will discuss policies with you later. We've seen instances where employers have used AI to assist them with disciplinary or dismissal procedures, which also includes a level of risk. High-profile example of this was the 2022 Estée Lauder case, where Estée Lauder, as of course the employer, used automated software to tell 3 makeup artists that they had lost their jobs. The employees were placed at risk of redundancy and were invited to reapply for their jobs using video interview software made by a recruitment company called HireVue. This software then informed the staff members that they were unsuccessful in applying for the roles and that they were being made redundant. And the staff were aware that the decision was made partly by the results of an automated judgment by the computer, which reviewed the video interviews. So their facial and speech patterns and that sort of thing were being assessed by AI. And when the case was settled, Estée Lauder said, "The company takes significant steps to counter unconscious bias in all our recruitment-related decisions. In the situation described, facial recognition accounted for well under 1% of employees' overall assessment. The company has teams who overlay objective performance-related data and other qualitative feedback which accounted for the majority of the employment assessment to make decisions on employment. Thus, any suggestion that facial technology played a decisive role in any employment-related decision is patently false." So a strong sentiment, but the 3 employees still received an out-of-court settlement. So this case demonstrates the importance of human contribution when making and conveying decisions to dismiss employees. So had Estée Lauder dealt with this differently, they might not have been facing 3 settlements. When making redundancies, employers still need to be able to explain the reasoning behind their selection processes. If AI is involved, employers will need to understand the basis of any decisions made. It's unwise to rely solely on AI to write dismissal or disciplinary letters, which need to be drafted accurately and in compliance with current regulations, and a failure to review them may lead in wrong information or information being omitted and sent out then to these employees. And this isn't even to mention the absence of human compassion towards someone who's losing their livelihood. So moving on then to data protection, which is another key concern when using AI as an employer. In November 2024, as Catherine's already mentioned, the ICO published its Audit Outcomes Report on the use of AI in the workplace. They stated the concerning discovery that AI tools were found to collect far more personal data than was needed, scraping large amounts of data and combining it with information beyond the CVs the covering letters provided, using data from millions of individuals' LinkedIn profiles and other social media, with both recruiters and candidates being unaware that this amount of data was being used. The ICO's Audit Outcomes Report on the use of AI at work makes recommendations in consideration of the above concerns, including fairness. So it's important that the AI tools being used are monitored for fairness, accuracy, or any biases they might have, and to make sure that these issues are addressed. Transparency and explainability. Employers will need to be able to explain to candidates how their personal information will be processed through AI and how it will be used for training, testing, and developing the AI tool. This information will need to be given through a detailed privacy notice. Before using our AI tools, it's important to ensure that a data protection impact assessment is carried out and continually updated as the AI tool develops. So this assessment must include a comprehensive assessment of any privacy risks arising from the processing of data through the AI tool, an explanation of any appropriate mitigating controls being used to reduce risks, and balancing a trade-off between privacy and competing interests. So the ICO recommends asking the following questions when engaging contracts with AI suppliers. Firstly, does your AI provider give you an explanation of the AI's logic? Does the contract clearly define which party is responsible for providing the personal information to candidates? So is it you as the prospective employer or service user, or is it the creator? Does the AI product collect only the minimum personal information necessary to achieve its purposes? This question will allow you to confirm to the candidate that the data will only be processed for the specific and limited purposes that you've given them. Is an impact assessment carried out and continually updated? The ICO also states that explicit written data processing instructions must be provided for the AI provider to follow when processing personal information on their behalf as an employer. AI providers and recruiters must also identify the lawful basis on which they, as a controller, will be processing personal information, where they are the controller, before any personal information is actually processed. And through recruitment exercises, special category data may also be processed depending on the role. And if this is used as part of an AI tool, then further assessments must be carried out. So special category data includes racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, trade union membership, genetic data, biometric data, health data, data concerning a person's sex, life or sexual orientation, but it does not include data about criminal allegations, which is subject to its own rules. In order to process special category data, you must identify the special additional condition which is applicable to the processing of this data. This includes explicit consent, employment, or vital interests. So when relying on the additional condition of consent, an employer must ensure that the consent is specific, granular, has clear opt-in, is appropriately logged and refreshed at periodic intervals, and is as easy to withdraw as it was to give. So when relying on legitimate interests, a legitimate interest assessment must be completed. So the key takeaway from the above is therefore to ensure that the reasoning behind any decisions made by AI tools is well understood. It's inadvisable to rely solely on AI for decision making in any employment process, but particularly through recruitment. Any reliance on AI must be transparent and explainable if challenged, because the alternative could result in discrimination claims which cannot be defended. From a GDPR perspective, it's important that data privacy matters are taken seriously, and this means understanding exactly how personal data is being used when inputted into AI tools, and ensuring that the details are included in a thorough and well-drafted privacy notice, both for candidates and employees. All of these GDPR regulations exist currently, but the difference now is the volume of data that will be scraped through AI and the importance of being able to control how the AI tools that might be used will use this data, meaning any gaps in your data protection processes are far more likely to be exposed and scrutinised. So I will move on to Claire, who will discuss some more of the practical aspects with you.
Hello everyone. So over the last year or so, as well as employees using AI in their day-to-day jobs, We've also seen it being used by employees to draft pages and pages of formal grievances, employment tribunal claim, particulars, witness statements, and submissions. And whilst AI can help employees to organise their thoughts, provide clarity and structure, and assist in articulating their concerns in dispute resolution, AI can make it easy for long, highly structured, often legally worded emails or documents to be produced. On the surface, this could look quite sophisticated, but it could quickly escalate the matter and make it complex to deal with and to respond to. These documents also sometimes contain incorrect legal references, exaggerated language, or issues and claims that don't really reflect what the employee intended to raise or have a legal basis to do so. So HR teams and their advisors are spending more and more time interpreting and trying to ascertain what the real issues are. And it's also worth bearing in mind the victimisation protections which apply when an employee has raised or alluded to a discrimination matter in the workplace. So employers simply can't ignore these grievances, because if the employees feel that their concerns are not being addressed or the matter is not resolved, then further grievances may follow. And as we've heard, employees may also develop unrealistic expectations because AI tends to provide overly confident assessments of legal positions and potential compensation, especially where employees don't include material facts which could change the outcome of the AI assessment. For example, when it comes to showing that they actually meet the definition of having a disability under the Equality Act, or ensuring that all the components of making a protected disclosure have been satisfied, as well as understanding if and how the legal and evidential tests for a claim will be satisfied. So this can all escalate issues and disputes that might have otherwise been resolved informally, leading employees to pursue matters to a tribunal, which may lead to verbose and less focused claims, statements and written submissions. And in such cases, there's likely to be need for further and better particulars to be ordered by the tribunal to clarify a claim, and several case management orders to cut through exactly what is being claimed, all which could impact on the costs of defending a claim, and with the confidence behind them, the possibility of reaching an early commercial settlement may also be impacted. And there's likely to be lengthy delays in resolving the matter, as the tribunal system is already very busy. So as well as the complexity of using AI in such ways, there's also been a case recently where an employee altered some of the medical evidence that he was relying on, and he was ordered to pay costs to his employer. So again, it's important to be alive to the fact that employees could be using AI in various ways in documents that they are providing to their employer, for example, fit notes, medical records, and CVs. So how should employers respond? Firstly, they should try and keep an eye out for changes in style or spellings, which might suggest that AI has been used, and try and keep the grievance process human-centred. Start with a face-to-face meeting to orally ascertain what the employee is generally concerned about, the factual allegations, and the outcome which they're seeking, rather than responding line by line to an AI-generated document. And supplementary questions can be asked, and records should be kept of what was said and agreed. Also, try and encourage informal early resolution where appropriate to avoid unnecessary formality. Ensuring AI policy clearly sets boundaries around data sharing and responsible use. And finally, training managers and HR teams to try and recognise AI-assisted grievances and documents and handle them proportionately and focusing on cutting through to the issues. So handled well, the trend doesn't need to be a threat. It can improve clarity in some cases, but employers do need to be prepared because AI-generated documents are becoming part of the modern workforce. So some concerns surrounding the use of AI. Whilst, as we've seen, it can help with productivity and free up employees' time and help with efficiency, for example, analysing large sets of data, such as financial records, to identify patterns, anomalies and trends, providing useful insights, in some roles or areas of work, as Catherine mentioned in a survey from April 2025, 1 in 4 workers surveyed worried that AI will lead to job losses. They're worried about automation replacing technical and analytical roles, or the employees need to be retrained. Where there are faster and cheaper options, redundancies may follow, and skills required for some roles may no longer be required. This can lead to uncertainty about future job security, as well as time and costs associated with upskilling and managing change. Employees may need guiding through what their employer's approach to AI is, what their future role will look like or evolve, and what skills they may need, and whether they can keep up as AI tools evolve. And again, employers should be alive to embracing opportunities, but also the effects on morale, hesitancy to adopt new technology, and resistance to change. In cases where an employee is aggrieved with how AI has been used in a decision process, the potential for tribunal cases in this area is more likely to increase as the use of AI increases as well. And as Victoria has already mentioned, there have been cases where AI has resulted in unfair decisions being made. There are genuine expectations that claims may be pursued if an AI system makes an incorrect assessment during a misconduct, capability, or redundancy process, if there are any bias or transparency issues, and with the potential erosion of human judgment and empathy, which are key to trust and confidence and ongoing relations. It's therefore important to consider how AI is used in decisions, and therefore to be a human involvement to try and reduce the risk of claims being pursued. The employer's role here is critical. Clear communication is essential, explaining why AI is being introduced and what it will and won't replace. Emphasising that AI is intended to supplement and assist, not replace, can help in the workplace. Providing meaningful training pathways, not just one-off sessions, and inviting employees to be involved with the testing and opportunities can help employees feel supported in building future skills. Also, involving individuals early in AI use and design, governance and implementation can give them a sense of ownership and confidence rather than feeling like change is being imposed on them, and may also further develop the opportunities and permitted uses of AI in the workplace. So handled well, AI can help specialist roles by removing repetitive tasks and giving people more time for using their knowledge and experience in other ways. However, without the reassurance and support, the fear may be of being replaced or left behind, or being aggrieved by the use of AI, which could become a significant barrier to successful adoption. So moving on to skills gaps and relying on AI. As we've seen, whilst staff can use AI for admin tasks, recording and summarising meetings, drafting documents and reports, analysis and for answers to an issue, saving time and improving presentation, there's a real concern that over-reliance on AI could create inaccurate or inappropriate outcomes, as well as knowledge and experience gaps. This might reduce critical thinking skills, problem-solving abilities, or understanding the underlying logic behind their work or decisions. It's important for outcomes to be sense-checked, validated, and a human approach will still be needed for empathy and in various ways to check for errors, misrepresentation, or flawed decision-making. And also, if foundation skills or knowledge aren't being built, then staff may struggle to review what is relevant or appropriate in situations when AI isn't available or when tasks require human judgment. Employers can help manage this by framing AI as a support tool rather than a replacement. Mentoring and hands-on training remain essential, along with regular checks to ensure employee understanding of the reasoning behind their work or their decisions. So monitoring accuracy, again, employees need to start to address this proactively. Staff should be trained not just in how to use AI, but its limitations. Review and validation processes must be implemented, and a culture of questioning AI outputs should be encouraged. In other words, efficiency gains from AI must be balanced with safeguards that ensures accuracy and maintain standards. And finally, moving on to what a good AI policy will need to contain. So as with other policies in the handbook, an AI policy can introduce or have an introductory section which sets out the purpose of the policy, as well as confirming it sets out the rules for using AI for which work activities and how risks and concerns will be minimised. It can also specify which parts of the workforce it applies to, including contractors and agency workers. The policy can explain the business's permitting or encouraging the use of AI and in an informed, responsible and ethical way, and set out the permitted and the prohibited uses of AI in the workplace. It can set out protocols for using AI when human input is needed, and the expectation that AI-generated outputs are reviewed before they are used or published. It can include the process for seeking authorization for expanding the permitted uses and the types of AI which can be used. The IT department should be involved with the development and review of the policy and a review board in place for the ongoing use of AI in the workplace. It can also remind of the ethical principles such as transparency, accountability and fairness, and refer to other policies such as diversity and inclusion, data protection, and IT and communications to ensure compliance with all of these matters. And the policy should be reviewed and updated regularly as AI develops. It should also have guidelines that prevent sensitive commercial information from being entered into public forums, reinforce data privacy and protection rules, and IP and copyright considerations need to be addressed as well. It should also include controls to guard against algorithm bias, ensuring that the data fed into AI systems is accurate, high quality and representative. Without this, the outputs can be unreliable or even harmful. It can also set out how training will be provided, how the use of AI will be monitored to ensure compliance with the policy and law, prevent misuse and monitor performance. And it can also keep records of where AI will be used, or cover keeping records of where AI will be used, and a section on if the policy is breached and for reporting any concerns. For all of these reasons, an AI policy is not something that should just be written and forgotten. It needs to be clearly communicated, reviewed as AI develops, actively discussed and embedded across the business. When done well, the policy will not only reduce the risk, but also become a valuable educational tool and help employees understand how AI supports roles, increasing confidence and adoption. So a well-designed AI policy can help protect the organisation while empowering people to use AI safely, responsibly and effectively. So that's all from us, and now we're going to move on to some questions.
So if anybody would like to ask us any questions, please feel free to fire away. We will have coffee as well, so if you'd like to ask a question privately, feel free. But Dermot, no, you kick us off.
How many companies have actually come to you to help them with the policy on AI?
I mean, we're seeing more and more coming to us because they are starting to consider.
Okay, so it's early stages. Yeah, because I think that needs to be a pretty thorough document.
Yeah, exactly. And the privacy notice that Victoria referred to, because you need to notify employees about how you're using their personal data.
Yeah.
And you do that through the privacy notice. So those two documents, the policy on AI and the privacy notice, keeping them updated are really critical to reduce risk.
Really good.
There isn't one answer that fits all, and so you'll be using AI in a different way. I mean, Gary caught a lot of us out with his AI drafted email. You need to really think about it and make sure you've got that oversight from a human being that really understands the business and how you're using it, and what the objective is, what the desired purpose is. So no,
Yes.
don't use AI.
I think just adding on to that, I think it could be really useful. Obviously, we're still in early days, but I think some cases like Estee Lauder, like those that we've mentioned, might have been a lot more robustly defended if they had a policy that made employees aware of what was being used, how they can use it, all of that. I think it could be a really, really useful tool rather than sort of a checklist as well. As this matter inevitably progresses and as it comes into most businesses.
Because I think the other thing that we mentioned is transparency. Often what we see in employment disputes is that people don't understand a decision. They don't know why that decision's been made, and so they challenge it and they become aggrieved. Whereas if you're transparent about the way you're using AI, the purpose for which you're using it, they'll understand more and hopefully accept that that's reasonable, and it will reduce the risk of claims being raised.
I can see it being used internally for with existing employees for potentially redundancy or promotion or some internal process. If it is used for recruitment, I can't see us using it. A recruitment agency very well. The risk, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but the risk of claims is much less because we've all been there applying for jobs, you get a rejection. And whether it's a human or an AI bot, you don't know, but humans got bias as well. If you read a CV, you don't like the appearance, you don't like whatever it is. So in terms of the legal the risk of litigation, it seems to me a bit more when it's used internally for promotion, for redundancy, for whatever. Is that what you're...
I mean, we do frequently see our disgruntled candidates that don't get jobs bringing claims in the employment tribunal around discrimination. So I think, I can see that it may become more prevalent because people are scanning CVs using AI, looking for particular words. They need to think about whether that's being done in a way that could unconsciously create biases. People are much more prevalent at making data subject access requests. So I don't know whether any of you as employers have had an employee make a data subject access request. They want to get evidence about how you've done things and why you've done things. So it's probably more likely to arise in a working relationship, but I think as more AI is being used in the recruitment sector and at that phase of a sort of employee journey, it does create more risks because, as I mentioned, interviews and as Gary mentioned, the way in which those things can be programmed, not necessarily consciously, but unconsciously in a way that could disadvantage certain sectors of the group of applicants can cause problems.
What about with the recruitment side of applicants overstating their abilities, if you like, with the use of AI, and employers finding out, obviously, quite quickly that they're not as capable as they should be? Is that something going to be a bigger issue as day one rights comes through as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it shows the importance of having human involvement in the recruitment process, not just relying on AI to say, this person's ticked all these boxes, so offer them the job. Interview them, probe and challenge and, get an understanding of whether you genuinely do think that what they've said in their CV is a reality, not a fiction drafted by AI. But yeah, once the day one rights come in, it will be much harder to terminate somebody's employment without going through a proper process. So there'll be more work involved in that process.
Proving that they almost lied via the tools they used.
Yeah, either proving that they were dishonest during the recruitment stage and maybe over presented their qualifications or skills, or that they just aren't able to perform the job that they've been employed to perform, and using the probation period to assess them and terminate their employment because they haven't passed their probation.
I found quite a lot of, especially graduate roles, the last question they ask in the whole process is, have you used AI any at all to aid in your application? And I guess that's a good way to see how honest they are. I personally think if you have used it a lot and the application's good and you say I have used it, that can almost become another string to your bow, that you're actually good at using AI. And the only way that you found out was because you were honest and you told them.
Especially for that KPMG company that's encouraging AI objectives, they might actually want people to be using it from day one, and then they're competent using it, as opposed to it being used in a bad way.
It's a real dilemma, and I had this just literally with my 15-year-old son last week applying for his work experience. I was like, do I make him write a letter, or do I show him how to create a letter via using the AI tool, because that's the way that You have to, you know, those tools are there to do that. So it's a real dilemma of skill versus capability and also efficiency of time as well, isn't it? So
I've actually seen on an application they asked you to answer a question using AI. So they actually want to see you use AI in a practical sense. It was only a 200-word answer, and it wasn't the entire application. But it's interesting to see that companies are now looking at how good you are at using AI. And obviously they don't want you just to copy and paste the question and put it into ChatGPT and say answer it. They want to see how you can actually expand on those answers and use prompts to make the answer good.
So does that all show in the answer to the question? So for example, what you put in, what AI comes back with, how you follow it up? Is there like the maths equation of following it through? What would the employer see with that?
Just the answer that came up
Yeah.
from ChatGPT. That would actually be a better question though. Let's see you're working out on ChatGPT or whatever AI system you use.
I mean, I think the reality is we can't get away from it. AI is here to stay, and it's going to become more and more prevalent. So training and understanding how to use it, making sure that the right data is being input so that you achieve fair and transparent outcomes will be critical. So people like Gary, the next generation of tech-savvy individuals, are the people that will help employers to sort of design and embrace how they adapt that within their organisations.
Since there's no law like currently designed to like deal with the risks of AI in employment, is it dealt with in the same way as like human bias might be dealt with? If someone came to you with a claim saying, "I don't understand why I haven't got this job."
I mean, it would be looking at the different elements of employment law that I spoke about to see whether potentially there's an angle that could give rise to a claim through some of that legislation. But I mean, with any claim, you really need to have some evidence to back up. You can't. It's not just a hunch that you don't think you got it because that you've been treated unfairly. You really need to try and find something that you can pin it on, which is why I mentioned the data subject access requests. Lots of employees or job applicants will use that route to try and gather evidence that they wouldn't otherwise have, and will be likely to ask employers to justify decisions that they've made, which is where employers need to understand why that decision has been made and make sure they understand the AI and how it's being used and how it's making decisions.
It might be a bit of an odd question, but we're always looking at how people aren't potentially going to be given roles based on AI. Could we not see the opposite, where if AI can only do what it's been told to do, right? So criteria has to be given to it, which is no different from the criteria that we have on a sheet in front of us if we're interviewing personally. So bias will always exist. Personally, I would look at team fit as opposed to skill set. Most jobs could be taught to a pretty good level, and I'd always look at team harmony over skill set. I've been there, I've done the opposite way around, and it's a disaster. So could we not end up seeing people potentially be given roles from AI because they have box ticked, which results in a poor choice of employment? Is that not going to happen equally as often as people maybe don't get given roles because of AI criteria?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI will create a need for different types of skills and different roles. So if someone is an expert in AI and they tick the right boxes because they know how to use it, then that may be something that the employer is looking for. But yes, I mean, I think the danger is that they do tick those boxes and they get offered the job and then they're not the right fit, and you have to go through the sort of convoluted exercise of ending their employment.
I guess that's where the interview process is really important, because if they've just ticked boxes, and then you had a very standard interview where you've just asked template questions, you don't really understand the person you're hiring, you don't understand the team fit. So I guess the best world is having the tick box and then you interview them and they're a great fit, so then you're uber confident that they are the person that you wanted.
And asking questions about AI as part of the interview process, that will help you to sniff out whether they have or haven't potentially used it. And asking the question, as Gary said, ask the question outright and see what the response is. Right. Well, thank you very much for coming along today. It's really lovely to see you all. We will be emailing the slides as well to you. So, round of applause.